Hello, Internet. Welcome back to another episode of Real Psych. I am Dr. JD Barton, and I am a licensed clinical psychologist.
I'm Dr. Joanna Whitkin, and I'm a cognitive neuroscientist.
Real Psych is a podcast where we share our gorgeously thoughtful opinions on the psychological phenomena playing out in all of your favorite movies.
JD, will there be learning?
Yes, ma'am.
Will there be science?
Yes, doctor.
Will there be delightfully informal, explorational, informational conceptualizations from two best friends who'd be talking about this anyways?
Woman, I said yes twice.
You didn't say Real Psych is your favorite podcast.
It is your favorite podcast.
Yeah, it's my favorite podcast.
It's my favorite podcast.
Yeah.
I just, last week I said it's a new podcast and I was like, well, so.
Oh, did you? I totally missed that.
I just called it new last week. So
it could be new to you, listener.
It could be new to you. And if it is, welcome.
Welcome.
You know what you should do? You should hit that subscribe button wherever you're watching or listening, because you're going to love what we're about to do. How are you?
I am good. Just a Tuesday. It's the day after Halloween.
It is the day after Halloween. For those of y'all listening, this is a week late in an episode to after to say this, but last week's episode was a little bit late. I've had a bunch going on. I had to be traveling, as you could see on the video. I was in a different space, and life has gotten in the way. So this one's coming to you on time, but last week's was a little late, and I do want to just acknowledge for those who are just waiting for those gorgeous Tuesday episode drops.
Yeah. We love you. We respect you.
We love you. We respect you. You're important to us.
Yes. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you for your patience. I was away for a little minute and now I'm back. And I got to say, my dog sure does be good. She's so good. I love her so much.
You had somebody watching her?
Yeah, my friend David watched her and had a lovely time with her. We had a gorgeous little moment. Although, fun fact, he bought these dog treats that are like meatball dog treats. She loved them. And he was like, but they give her the toots. And I was like, well, dog treats sometimes are not always
kind
whatever.
Of what they do.
In the ingredients on these dog treats, onions and garlic.
No.
Toxic to dogs.
Yeah.
Literally toxic to dogs.
That's very basic level understanding.
It blew my mind. In the ingredients on the package for dogs.
Wow.
I was like, this is rude. Wow. So I'm not going to call out the brand because of how wide our listenership is. I don't really want to mess with their bottom line. But I do want to say, don't buy your dogs meatball treats.
Or check those ingredients, because you can't just assume, right, that because they say they're for dogs that they're actually okay for dogs.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So should we just get into this movie? Should we just go for it? Should we just go nuts?
Let's just talk about it, because this movie, was long. I forgot how long. How do children watch this movie?
This movie is 2 hours and 22 minutes long.
It's like a Judd Apatow film.
It is like that. It's like a Scorsese.
It's freaking long.
Spielberg went for it and was like, I think it's fine.
Did you know this has a 29% on Rotten Tomatoes?
Are you serious?
Yeah, I was offended.
Y'all, we can't be trusting Rotten Tomatoes.
No.
I mean, listen. My the moment I realized you can't trust Rotten Tomatoes was when I looked up the movie Enough with Jennifer Lopez, who we stan on this channel. We
love her.
It has like a 13.
No,
and I was like, no.
That's that. First of all, that's misogynistic. The misogyny.
I couldn't believe it. I was so upset, and I just immediately refused to
what
ever
did
believe
Marry
Rotten
Me get?
Tomatoes ever again. I'm okay. That one maybe deserves a 13, But yeah, you can't trust movies like Dumb and Dumber, I think has like a really, really low. So it's one of those things that it's like an
Stupid.
amalgamation of critique, which
Mm.
ugh, um yeah. I appreciate that they have like an audience score and a critic score.
Yeah, they do try to differentiate. And the that was the critic score, 29.
Yeah, I'm sure. The audience score was 10,000. My old boss used to be like, oh yeah, we went and saw that movie. I didn't like it, but we went to see it because it had 97 tomatoes. It had 97 tomatoes.
You
And I don't
can't
know. I just
argue with
didn't care
that.
for it. Yeah. Yeah. But this movie, what's it about? What happens? This one
Okay.
is long, so we're gonna have to go.
Yeah, I
I
think we gotta skip go high level.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is like a retelling, right? It's Hook, but it's a Peter Pan universe,
Mhm.
metaverse situation.
It's in the Peter Pan multiverse,
Yeah, multiverse.
the Peter
But
Pan cinematic
basically,
universe.
we see Robin Williams. He plays Peter Banning or something,
Yeah, Peter
and
Banning.
he is all grown up and has a family and is in mergers and acquisitions and very like stressful job but kind of crushing it at work. And
Yeah.
he's married to
Mora.
Moira.
Mora.
Mora. I
Hmm.
couldn't I felt like they were saying Moira at times.
I thought it was Mora.
I think I was confused about it. It's fine. Anyways, Mora. And her grandmother is Wendy.
Wendy Moira
OG.
Angela Darling.
Yeah. Oh,
Whole fam
is that
plus.
her middle name? So is that just so
Moira is Wendy Moira Angela Darling
okay.
is
So that's where I got it confused.
yeah.
And I knew I heard it somewhere. But
And mhm.
yeah, no, go ahead.
I was just gonna say he's crushing it as a businessman and fucking it up as a dad. He is
Yeah.
on the phone during his daughter's play where she plays Wendy and Peter Pan. He
Hmm.
completely misses his son's baseball game where
Yeah.
he strikes out and that's how they lose. They're flying to England for something.
For
And
Christmas or the holidays or something. And
yeah,
she hasn't been there in 10 years.
yeah,
And yeah, so he's just like, yeah, he like screams at his kids at one point because he's on the
yeah.
phone. You can just see
I'm
he's
on the
really
phone call of my
not,
life.
he is not doing a good job as a dad.
No, he's mean.
His kids are just like begging for attention and
And they're
affection,
being kids.
and they're being kids and they're adorable.
Yeah. Oh, and he's
And
afraid to fly.
yes,
Yes. Okay. We had a text conversation about this, and I was like, what? Yes, 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 yes.
yeah,
He's afraid to fly.
it's like a pretty, we'll talk about it. It was like, yeah,
Yeah.
even on the plane, he like gets stressed out
He has
because
like panic attacks.
his son is playing with a baseball. I like how he's like, you're gonna break a window, not like you're disturbing all of these people who are
Yeah. Not like
sleeping.
you're being a butthole.
Yeah. He's making a lot of noise throwing a
Yeah.
baseball around in an
Yeah.
airplane. But he's like very nervous that he's gonna break a window and
Yeah.
like he's gonna get sucked out of the airplane. And he's
You're
very
afraid you're
uncomfortable.
going to be sucked out.
Yeah.
Yeah. They get to England. They get in and Wendy comes down the stairs and she's all old and frail. And they've
Dame
really
Maggie
like
Smith.
aged up Dame Maggie Smith, like
Yeah.
really aged up Dame Maggie
Yeah.
Smith. And Jack explains what he does as a job, where his company goes in and buys vulnerable companies and then like sells them off in small ways, right?
Mhm.
And she goes, Peter, you've become a pirate.
I loved that line because I was like,
Mhm.
yeah, that is what that job is.
That is what that job is.
Yeah.
And then they all go to celebrate Wendy, who's had a home for orphans.
Hmm.
And so she's supported orphans and has done, a lifetime of charity work for orphans. And while they're celebrating her, the kids get Liam Neeson's daughter. They're taken. And the police come in. Phil Collins shows
Phil
up as one of the
Collins. Yeah.
police.
There's a
There's some
lot
great
of,
cameos.
yeah, the cameos in this are like no
I know.
joke.
And they're all freaking out and they can't find him. And Toodles is there. That's all we need to say about Toodles
Yeah.
until the end. And then Peter has a glint of light come in, and it like punches him and moves him around, and then it's Tinkerbell, and
Yeah. Julia Roberts.
it's Julia Roberts, and they have an argument. She flies him to Neverland in a little kid's like tent thing.
Yeah, because I think she's so like Captain Hook has kidnapped his children. There's a note
Yeah.
on the door.
Yeah.
Peter has like no memory of who this even is. And when Tinkerbell comes, has no understanding, doesn't believe in fairies.
Yeah.
You
That's
know,
right. When
has
the kids are taken as well, there's a note from Captain James
yeah.
Hook, and Wendy does say to him, "The stories are
She tries
real."
to tell him, and he's like, "What are you talking about, lady?
Mara.
You saved me, and I got
Yeah.
adopted, and that's my life. I have no memories from before I was 13, and that's fine and normal, and I
Yeah.
have no opinion on that."
Great thing to talk about as we continue on with this podcast.
And
Um,
so, yeah, so then Tinkerbell kidnaps him, basically, like wraps him up in a blanket, and is like, "You got to get to Neverland."
you got to save your kids.
Yeah.
Gets there, drops him in the middle of all these pirates, where you hear Captain Hook, played by Dustin Hoffman, and
Mm-hmm.
Smee, played by Bob Hoskins. Both of them brilliant in this movie.
Yeah.
Announce they've stolen Peter Pan's children.
Yes.
And then Peter like fights out, and he's like, "Those are my kids." And he's like, "Great, if you can fly to them, you can have them."
Right. Because
And
he sees how like who is this person? Like this can't possibly be the same Peter. First, he's like old, and also he just seems to have absolutely no.
right.
Who is this? Where is my worthy
Yeah.
adversary?
Yeah. There is a nice character development moment where you see him kill Glenn Close in a cameo,
Mm-hmm.
sticking her in a box full of scorpions. The
Yeah.
boo box. And Peter can't do it. He's like super disappointed because he wanted his great and worthy opponent to come
Yeah.
back and fight him. And this like businessman has shown up,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
Captain Hook is upset. So Tinkerbell cuts a deal where she says, give him 3 days to get in order, and he's going to come back and fight you for his kids. And Captain Hook is like, fine.
Yeah.
So he agrees. They launch him off the thing. Mermaids kiss him on the mouth so he can breathe. That's science. And then he gets dumped into the middle of the Lost Boys, who are like, who is this old man?
Yeah. Not into it. And he's trying, to say that he's Peter, but he also still doesn't believe that he's Peter Pan. But Tinkerbell is trying to like advocate for him, but they're all like, this guy is an old fuddy duddy and
Yeah.
has no business being here.
And he agrees.
And he agrees. And there's this whole like they draw a line and say like, who
Yeah,
believes
yeah,
this
yeah.
is Peter or not? And there's one cutie little kid who like looks at his face, like pushes his skin back and is like, "Oh, there you are."
There you are, Peter. Which, like,
Yeah.
good Lord, if I met somebody from my childhood and they like moved my sagging skin to be like, there you are, JD, I'd be like, I'm gonna get that like facelift immediately. Like
Yeah.
that would not fly
Tomorrow.
for me. Like yesterday. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'd be in trubs. So
Then it's
they
like a montage of
it's like a
like
montage of
a
him.
training montage.
Yeah, he's got to learn to fight. He's got to learn to fly. He's got to learn to crow, and he's gonna try to do it for his kids. Also Rufio. There's a head lost boy, Rufio, that is just one of the like most seminal characters of our childhood. Like
Totally.
Rufio is like
Yeah.
never not a good Halloween costume.
Yeah,
Like
absolutely.
anybody, if I ever saw somebody show up in a good Rufio, I would be like, done.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You win.
100%. You win. So Rufio is very opposed because he's the big cheese these days.
Mm-hmm.
So they're trying to do the things, and they're trying to teach him to fly, and they're trying to teach him to whatever, and it's not working, and it's not working, and he's so hungry, and they have this dinner.
Mm-hmm.
And at the dinner, he can smell the food, and it smells amazing, and then they all open the lids of everything, and there's nothing there. And all the kids are eating this like imaginary food. And he's like, what?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, what?
Yeah.
And they're like, you've got to believe it in order to eat it. And he's like, giving up. And then he and Rufio get in this big fight, and he finally starts to like plug in to this world. And he calls him a rude, crude, lewd sack of pre-food chew, dude, and a paramecium brain. And all the
Yes.
kids are like, bangarang. And he's actually starting to like make some ground. And then he's like, Rufio, you're a whatever, and you can't fly. And then he flings imaginary food in his face and it hits him. And you're like,
It clicks.
it clicks. And they're like, you're doing it, Peter.
And all they eat is like rainbow Play-Doh
It's Cool Whip with food coloring in
with
it.
like mashed potatoes. I don't know what it is, but
I
it's
don't know
all
what it
different
is.
colors. And yeah, then there's a big food fight, and you see Peter really like give in to the imagination and the creativity and like this whole scene. And from there, he's able to fight again. And then
Right.
he's working on flying, and Tinkerbell helps him with that of just like what's his happy thought? It's his
Yeah.
children.
And all the meanwhile that he's in his growth montage,
Mm-hmm.
Captain Hook is working real hard on his son, Jack. And Captain Hook has decided to brainwash Jack to be his son now instead of
Yeah. Well, it's like, how
Peter
can I
Pan's son.
really get to Peter
How can I
Pan? And
really
this
get to
is
Peter
like a
Pan? I
plan
can
by
take
Smee.
his son.
Yeah.
Yeah. Make them love you. And Maggie, the daughter, refuses and is
Not
never
having it.
cooperating, which, by the way, like women, like this
She
is
just like goes and sings a
feminism.
song. No one messes with her.
Feminism.
Yeah. She does whatever the hell she wants on that ship.
Yeah. She's literally just like, you're a mean man who doesn't have a mommy. Like,
Yeah.
burn.
I'm going to go sing this solo and
Yeah.
just live my life.
Yeah. It's not even a musical, really, but she's a star.
Yeah. She is.
Anyways, so all the while he's working to brainwash Jack. And also like Captain Hook is going through his own sort of like emotional crisis. There is some like weird suicidality that
Yes.
we're not going to spend too much time on today, but it is like notable that there is a scene where he sort of almost attempts suicide and says, don't you dare try to stop me. Don't you dare try to stop me. Try to stop me. Get up off your ass and try to stop me, Smee. He does this like whole thing.
But he's definitely like, there's definitely like he's like depressed because there's no great adventures left for him, which is why he wants to kind of revive this this like war that he has with Peter Pan.
Yeah, he does. So Peter, in the process of his own thing, finds the old tree that they used to live in when it was Wendy and John and Michael and Tim and Peter and the other lost boys in Peter's day. And he sort of unlocks his childhood memories through this tree. And he remembers being a baby, and he remembers running away as a baby, which was like,
yeah, that's
weird.
not how that works.
But also, like, it's a movie where people fly, so I guess babies can run away. And he remembers like Wendy being there, and he would come every spring for Wendy, but she just gets older and older. Great Gwyneth Paltrow cameo.
Yeah.
Actually, I believe this is her first movie.
Yeah, that makes sense. She's so young.
She's so young. Peter. Peter. And then Maggie Smith. I'm old, Peter. I've grown up. And then he falls in love with her daughter.
No, granddaughter.
Yeah, her granddaughter, Maura. Yeah, she got real old.
Yeah.
And
kisses her while she's asleep. No
kisses
consent.
her while she's asleep. #consent.
Yeah.
And then he decides to stay. It is an interesting thing that this is just, I'm gonna fact check this movie a little bit and just say like it's weird that like you don't get older when you live there, but he came as a baby and now he's like 13.
I know. I have the same exact thought of like, is there just a point where they would stop growing even if they go, because by the rules of what I thought Neverland operated under, he would stay a baby if he went there as a baby.
Yeah. I mean, Captain Hook seems to be aging slowly.
Yeah, it's
but
like
maybe he was always an old man.
Maybe just time goes by slowly. I don't understand. That was another thing is I don't understand how time works because I wasn't sure how long Maura had been like mourning her kids. She's
right.
Like she was like,
it looks
I don't know.
It's like I guess it's still winter, so hopefully only a few weeks
Yeah.
or
But it was
days.
3 days, right?
Is that what it was? 3 days?
Well, three
Oh,
days
in
in
Neverland.
Neverland.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it seems, you know what?
We don't know how time works
We'll
there.
bring like some sort of like hypothetical quantum physicist in here to talk about the ways that
Ant-Man.
time can overlap. We'll bring Ant-Man and Quantum Mania. Anyways, theoretical physics, we'll figure this out.
Mhm.
But so he learns how he gets all this stuff back and then remembers the moment that his son was born. That's his
Mhm.
happiest thought.
Mhm.
He can fly. He can
Mhm.
fly. He can fly. He can fly. He can fly. He can fly. That's from the Disney movie. Anyways, so then he's like, I gotta go get my kid. Well, also there's a weird moment where he like forgets that he has kids. He's like so connected to this like memory now that he's like, Peter Pan's got kids.
Yeah,
Peter Pan got kids.
he's got some like dissociation between these two
Yeah,
pieces of himself.
it is. You know, we could talk about DID here, but we're not going to.
We're not
Dissociative
going to.
identity
Yeah.
disorder. But we're not. So he then is like, I gotta go get my kids. Oh, first Tinkerbell hits on him.
Ugh. Yeah.
Julia
Does this
Roberts
movie
makes
pass
herself
the
big.
Bechdel test?
I mean, no,
I
because it's
don't think it
always about Peter.
does. Yeah.
They're always at least talking about their dad.
Yeah. I
But
mean, there
as
is.
we've said, Fun Home by Alison Bechdel does not pass the Bechdel test. So it does pass the Bartkin test,
Oh
which
my God.
is just like a number of people of color with lines that actually influence the plot and matter.
Mm.
It does pass the
Did we
Bartkin
have this
test.
conversation before about Bartkin? I for a second thought that you and I had combined our last names and made up a test.
That's what
And
I
then
just did.
I know, but I forgot what our test was.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I was like, that's what's happening.
I know, I
Um,
forgot.
yeah, that's the
I forgot
Bartkin
we had
test.
done that.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good test.
It's a good test, the Bartkin
Yeah.
test.
Yeah.
And this one does actually pass the Bartkin test, which considering the year that it came out, I know it's like the 90s, so it's like, oh well, but honestly, like impressive.
Yeah.
Impressive. And so he goes, he fights for the kids. There's a bunch of like, he wins, and then he's like, let's walk away. And then Captain Hook is like, ugh. And then he's like, I win. And then he like goes to walk away, and Captain Hook is like, ugh. He kills Rufio, and Rufio says, I wish I had a dad like you. And then Jack is no longer like confused.
Right. It's like this movie, this man murders children. Like,
yeah,
this is not like a fun,
and not even in a fun way. Yeah.
I just feel like I watched this as a kid and should have been more traumatized.
Yeah, it's like an adult killing kids.
Yeah.
And they show up with like eggs.
Yeah.
There's like pirates with guns and swords, and they're like eggs.
Yeah, that they
and
make
like
it look like it's a machine
sticky
gun.
slingshot balls.
Yeah.
Anyways, so blah 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 blah. This all happens. Captain Hook tries one more time to get him. He is very scared of clocks. They all scare him out with clocks. He sticks his hand in the crocodile. Y'all know the story of Peter Pan. Sticks his hand in the crocodile, pulls it out. The crocodile lands on him. He disappears. Peter sends his kids on to go back. Then gives the sword to, I don't know his name. Did I just fail the Bartkin test?
No. It's something like mud butt or something.
I want to say Pugsley, but that's Adam's family.
It's literally something like mud butt.
Anyways, he's real sweet and
he's
cute.
So cute.
It's a cute movie. He gives him the sword. He's in charge of the Lost Boys. Peter flies home. Magically, he loves his kids and he hates work.
Yeah.
And he's like grown up, but like in the good way. He's like reverted to his childhood, but in a healthy way. It's sort of the anti
Is it healthy?
Mrs.
Like,
Doubtfire.
I feel like Yeah,
where he's
definitely.
like such a kid and then he has to like
Hmm.
learn to like grow up. And in this one, he's like such an adult and then he has to learn to be a kid.
Yeah, both lots of fun dress up
Yeah, totally.
and being not the best husband, but that's like a separate thing.
I he's rude. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Toodles gets his marbles back. He can fly now. And it's like, yay, magic is real. And we're the Peter Pan family.
Yeah.
My dad's Peter Pan. And then he went on to do Can't Hardly Wait.
That's where that kid is from.
That kid's in Can't Hardly Wait.
That's so
Yeah,
funny.
Jack. All right. How'd you feel about the movie?
I mean, I love it. I feel like it's so interesting to watch it through our lens because like a ton of stuff came up for me of like what we could research and talk about.
A ton.
Yeah. So I don't want to give it away. We'll
Yeah,
take a little break.
we will. I will say, like, this movie, when it came out, I remember, I mean, I was very young, but I just remember like everyone saw it.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone was talking about it. It was so beloved, this movie.
Mm-hmm.
Like, imagine someone our age who's like, oh yeah, I've never seen Hook. You'd be like, what?
Yeah. It's such a part of like our I don't know, it feels like such a part. I've seen it so many times.
So many times.
Yeah.
So many times.
Because it like it's Spielberg, but also all of the acting in it is fantastic. It's fun, it's whimsical. It's like there's just so much.
Yeah, there's so much. We, when it came to researching, had so many options.
Yeah.
Um, and so we're gonna take a break here, but when we get back, we're gonna talk a little bit about some Stockholm syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
We're gonna talk about
Memory after traumatic
suppressed
experiences.
childhood memories. And then we're also just gonna talk about like the importance of imagination in the
Yeah.
human mind. So
Mhm.
stick with us. We'll be right back
Be right
after
back.
these massages.
Bye.
Bye. Well, we are back.
We're back.
We are back, everybody. So I'm gonna kick us off with some of the research that I did on this movie. So
Mhm.
I wanted to actually, rather than doing like studies and things like that, I wanted to just spend some time talking about sort of a broad psychological diagnosis that people know of, that people
Mhm.
talk about often,
Mhm.
which is Stockholm syndrome. So I wanted to look into Stockholm syndrome because Jack is kidnapped. He is then sort of reprogrammed by his
Yeah,
kidnapper
this is textbook.
to side with him. Like, this is
Mhm.
very much Stockholm syndrome. So how's about I go through a little bit of history about Stockholm syndrome?
I'd love it.
So the name Stockholm syndrome came from a 1973 bank robbery incident that happened in Stockholm, Sweden. And in this, there was a 6-day standoff with the police. And in this 6 days, which honestly maps onto this movie
Yeah.
pretty well,
Mhm.
the many of the captive bank employees started to demonstrate sympathy toward the bank robbers. And then after they were set free, some of the bank employees refused to testify against the bank robbers in court and even raised money in their defense. So from this 1973, this is where the term Stockholm syndrome was coined. So all it is essentially is a psychological response to being held captive, where people form a psychological connection to their captors and begin to show sympathy. There this sort of Stockholm syndrome can include other types of trauma now. where it doesn't have to necessarily be kidnapping, but basically in which there's a bond between an abuser and a person being abused. And so this is, the way that I always think when we've talked a lot about trauma on this podcast, but the way that I always think about this, and we'll talk more about it in your research in a moment. This is a coping mechanism, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what this is a mechanism that our brains like to use in order to survive, that some people's brains like to use, right? Not everyone in the Stockholm, Sweden incident, became sympathetic toward the captors, but that it's a thing our brains are using to survive trauma or abuse, right? It's kind of like trauma bonding, the concept of learned helplessness. There's another term that I really don't like, that's called battered person syndrome, which I really don't love. But when we talk about the sort of the fight or flight response,
that's what I was thinking of. Yeah.
So we've talked about this before on the podcast, but it's not just fight or flight, right? So it's fighting, fleeing, freezing, and I think just because of the F, they use it, but fawning.
Yeah.
And so fawning is this kind of reaction. It is basically when you are engaging with your abuser, one of the easiest ways to digest the abuse that is happening is to start to believe that they need to do it, right? That there is a reason why the person is doing this to you. And I think it's sort of tied into this just world hypothesis that we've talked about so much on this podcast, right? Like, if we believe that the only reason that they're doing this to us is because they really, really have no choice, we now feel safer.
Yeah.
We now are able to sort of tie this into just this moment, just this experience. It doesn't mean the whole world could attack us. It means that if someone's going to do harm, it's only because they have good reason.
Right.
In domestic violence, this is a really common response, which is to believe like he's under so much stress, she's under so much stress. And so we form these beliefs like, I wish I hadn't like provoked this response. I need to learn to do better, right? And again, I apologize if this is triggering even to sort of discuss this, but I want to name, because it's very common that people, when you see someone in an abusive relationship, our thought is like, just go, just get out.
Right.
And our brains work really, really hard to protect us. And this is a strange and unexpected way that our brains are protecting us. And if you think about it, right, by working with and not against your abuser, you're likely to feel more secure, right? When you're not being victimized by an abuser, you're then likely to feel grateful because they're not harming you. And so it might make it easier to process kindness over constant, persistent fear, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's like energetically conserving, you know what I mean? Like and it's also, there's this just world hypothesis, but there's also like the locus of control, right? So if you make it about you and what your actions are and like anticipating, like thinking I provoked them, or, they're under a lot of pressure, or like, this is like something where you see people getting really good at predicting people's moods or like emotional states, because it's protective for them to like know when they need to like back off, when like things like that. And so, but it's this assumption that gives the victim more control or perceived control over the situation. And the way I think about like the fight or flight is sort of, we're talking about the sympathetic nervous system. This is like a hormone response.
Yeah.
It is an acute, like short-term situational thing. And when we talk about Stockholm syndrome, it's really this more chronic, like takes days or, longer to develop and becomes a relational kind of dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
That's like more than just your body's innate response.
Right.
It's kind of this chronic response or chronic coping with something like this.
Yeah. And there are varying levels of this abuse, right? There's, really extreme ones, like, I don't know, a pirate has kidnapped you as a child and has made you believe that you're the son of that pirate, right? Where it's very explicit. And then there are others like coach athlete abuse, where people can start to feel so beholden to a coach because they believe their success is because of the coach. And so if the coach is hard on them, it's for your own good and like these kinds of things. I know lots of people who feel this way. Also, as y'all know on this podcast, I love gymnastics, and gymnastics has a lot of stories of this. But yeah, so there's a lot of ways in which this can happen. So in terms of outlook prognosis, like what to do, because this is a trauma response, a trauma-focused therapy is really, really effective, right? Just like we started out talking, right? This is a coping strategy. So the more you can work with someone to understand that like what they did, right, was a coping strategy, and that they're not broken, they're not wrong, they didn't do this on purpose, this is not their fault, any of those things, which is what we do in trauma therapy, right? Is really spending time, not just being told this isn't your fault, but like really spending time. A really common trauma response is like freezing, right? And people are like, why did I freeze? It's my fault because I didn't run more, or it's my fault because I was where I was when I was there, and that's my fault, right? And this is all that just world hypothesis. We need to believe that if we do things differently, we'll be safe.
Yep.
And so a lot of trauma therapy is really spending time holding two things. One, the fact that it is not your fault that this bad thing happened. And two, understanding that the world is not always safe, but we can seek safety, right? Finding ways to empower someone to find safe spaces and to engage in safe spaces, because that is the empowering thing, right? Is the belief that if another bad thing happens, I will be able to survive it or get past it.
Yeah.
In that sense. Yeah.
Ugh. That was it's super interesting. And yeah, that was totally what was happening in this movie with
huge. Yeah.
What was this? Jack, right?
Jack.
The son.
Have to save Maggie, have to save Jack. Hookie's back.
And so I feel like a lot of what we didn't see, and really the Lost Boys as a group of individuals and children, like a group of children, you have to imagine that there are some like hugely traumatic and chronic traumatic experiences happening there. And so one of the things that I found
they're
really
constantly being attacked by adult men with hooks for hands.
I mean, their lives are in danger at all times.
Their lives are in danger.
No one's taking care of them. They have to like eat imaginary food. They're like, they're not, they take care of each other, but it's like, there's also what I assume is the circumstances under which they were taken to Neverland, which I can't imagine were like that baby was kidnapped in my head. When I saw that scene, I was like, he was just kidnapped to Neverland. He didn't run away.
Taking children from parts of the whole world for many years. So Julia Roberts just, was all about it.
Right. She was just,
like in Mommy Dearest.
But like, so you have to imagine, if you really think about like, these kids are all coming from what I can only imagine are like hugely traumatic backgrounds, right? Yeah. If they did run away, then there's also likely trauma there that made them want to run away. Like, there's we don't know every child's backstory, but they're all like these trauma bonded little kids. And so I was really interested, and another kind of clue that we see that suggests trauma is the fact that Robin Williams has no memory of his life from before he was 13.
Yeah.
And, maybe that's for the purposes of this movie and the blah, 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 but like, when something like that happens, you have to imagine that there could be trauma that is causing this loss of memory. Okay. So that's what I was really interested in researching, basically like the impact of childhood abuse or childhood trauma and how that can impair memory. Now this is like it's actually like a pretty broad field. And it's also, my dissertation was somewhat on this, like how post-traumatic stress can impact memory. And so there's different types of memory. We've talked about this before. But really what we see here is like episodic or autobiographical memory that's impaired with Peter.
Right.
He doesn't remember things about himself, but he's not really, his ability to remember things or, procedural, like how to do things or what things are, like those seem fairly intact. Right. And we see with these types of memory, like we call it semantic. So like, what do things mean? Procedural, how to do things, working memory, how to use like short-term memory to accomplish tasks.
Right.
The impairments there in children who like have experienced trauma versus children who have not. The literature is really mixed. It doesn't seem like there's any like evidence for just baseline impairments in that type of memory. Although when we talk about emotional memory or potentially triggering types of stimuli that you're showing, like in an experiment, if you're showing them, like, for example, I did research with military service members, and if we showed them combat scenes, that's where we saw some of these impairments emerge. If you showed them just normal images, that didn't seem to like be different based off of levels of trauma or post-trauma. But now when we talk about episodic or autobiographical memory, this idea of like repressed memories, this is like a different type of memory. And there's kind of like two profiles of people. So one is, and they're related to, but not the same as post-traumatic stress disorder and those kinds of symptom clusters that we've also talked about.
Okay.
So like the big clusters in post-traumatic stress disorders, like hypervigilance, re-experiencing, numbing, right? Avoidance. Those are kind of the four.
Negative outlook on the world.
There's also like a dissociation kind of one that can come up sometimes, but there's like a hypervigilant kind of group. If we're talking about memory specifically, there's, they may have like super vivid memories of the trauma.
Okay.
Maybe be more prone to re-experiencing, but basically, they'll remember things with extreme detail, remember traumatic experiences with extreme detail, to the point where, they'll have more kind of like quote unquote errors on laboratory tests. Like they'll remember things as traumatic that aren't traumatic. They're kind of overcorrecting almost. Like their attention towards potentially traumatic things are like, it's very highly tuned up. And so, that's because your brain is literally wired to, like, evolutionarily, you want to remember traumatic experiences because you want to remember how to escape. Escape in the future, right? So if you are able to, narrowly avoid capture by a tiger, and then you want to remember what you did. And so your brain is literally wired to capture details of that event more, like in vivid detail, because that is, the stakes are higher. Right. And so this is like evolutionarily what we're talking about. This is kind of the like profile of people that can kind of exist. We see too, like with Toodles, for example, who seems to have escaped Neverland and has grown up. He's an old man, but he remembers everything. He's talking, people think he's crazy, but he's talking very much about his past and Neverland very openly and very like he remembers stuff. So it's not like, there are definitely two types of people. And then, you have the kind of person that I think Peter falls under, which is like using more other strategies or coping strategies to kind of not remember
Mm-hmm.
traumatic things.
Yeah.
And that can lead to memory loss of childhood memories.
Right.
And so we do see like these, so like there's some interesting kind of like catchphrases that came up, like uh repression, like in the Freudian sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is like that. I don't know that that's what's really happening here, because just Freudian things in general seem to not be like super empirically supported
I mean, the defense
as we
mechanisms overall are like
yeah.
fine, sure. So like
Yeah.
repression as a defense mechanism is like, yeah, okay.
Yeah. I mean, I think
You're
it's
not going to
like,
go there because it's easier for you. Okay, sure.
right. But I think it's more related to like emotion regulation strategies, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Which is like, avoidance, right? They may
Mhm.
be unwilling to talk about memories, like
Right.
trauma, which means
Yeah.
that they're rehearsing that information less, which means
Hmm.
it is less likely to be retained in memory.
Okay.
So increased forgetting can happen if you like never rehearse
Talk about it.
information,
Yeah.
you never talk about it. And there's some evidence that suggests that those strategies are especially prevalent when the experiences are associated with self-blame, helplessness, even, like repeated trauma. But
Hmm.
there's like, it's more, you may be more likely to cope in that way. But there's
Right.
also another kind of factor, which is attachment style, avoidant attachment style. So there's like a study by Edelstein in 2005 that showed childhood abuse victims with low scores on avoidant attachment showed greater memory accuracy for cases of severe abuse,
Hmm.
whereas victims scoring high in avoidant attachment demonstrated poor memory for severe abuse.
Right.
So that may be like this critical factor for what kind of subtype you are,
Yeah.
which I thought was really interesting, because you do see people like who have experienced trauma who like can tell you every single thing that happened.
Every detail.
And it's extremely accurate. It is extremely like, well, it's like reliable. Is
It's
it reliable or does it
extremely
change?
consistent. It's
Consistent.
not,
Yeah.
it's often inaccurate. And because some
Yeah.
of that are like these memories, like we say, there's like blame involved. There's a
Yeah.
lot of
Yeah. Yeah.
tone to a memory that like it may be accurate, but like the events may be accurate, but the sort of context is so shifted, right? Where it's like, oh, I just froze. What could I have done? And it's like, so the memory now becomes about your freezing and not about like the
Yeah.
weapon
Yeah.
that was
Yeah.
being held to you. So
Right.
it it's not perfect, but often the like
The
episodic parts of it
consist.
are,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's a very consistent narrative. So to spend
Yeah.
time with someone in therapy, like we go over the trauma narrative and then we try to inject some sort of new uh viewpoint on the same
Yeah.
information. So it's not always accurate, right? Like people
Yeah.
often
Yeah.
remember child abuse as their fault, right? Where
Mm-hmm.
it's like, no, 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 no. So
Right.
yeah, so often the event may be accurate, but the actual sort of circumstance and the judgment and the opinions and the ownership and the blame is often very inaccurate in
Yeah.
memory.
That's a good distinction. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but then there's also, the type of person who like is like, nope, nothing happened. And that can even be within like children
Total.
within the same family who have
Yeah.
experienced similar abuse. And some children have no memory of certain things, and other children do, it's like of
Right.
the same event. And
Well, some of it can
yeah.
involve like a dissociative response in the moment. So, right, we talk
Mm-hmm.
about feeding, or we talk about fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. Sort of the
Mm-hmm.
combination of flight and freeze is dissociate,
Mm.
which is a very common trauma response. And so people
Yeah.
really might not remember
Yeah.
what
They never
is
even
going
like
on.
encode the
They don't
information.
encode the information. I
Yeah.
mean, memory, like the relationship, and I mean, you know this way more than anybody, but like the relationship between memory and trauma is so cyclical. They are
Yeah.
so they're influencing each other so much, because the way you remember what happened
Yeah.
impacts whether you have a post-traumatic stress response. And so a lot of what PTSD like therapy is about is like, let's hold these memories. I usually use the metaphor, I've probably said this on the podcast, that like if a memory is like a picture in a frame, a traumatic memory is like you've shattered the glass and then you've put it away in a drawer. And now anytime you pull out that memory, you're going to cut yourself. So until we take the time to really look at like how we can sort of straighten out the glass and put it together, the picture may always be distorted. It may never be a nice picture you want to look at. But if we take the time, we may be able to at least make it a safe picture for you to have. And so that's kind of like how I think about that in general.
You're such a good therapist. That's amazing.
Thank you.
That's so nice good. To say. I love that.
That's what I think about it as.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's really what came to mind when I was watching this, was just like, why does this guy have no memories?
Well, I think it's also, I mean, it also makes sense, you know, outside of the trauma perspective of just like the ways in which we view like crazy people. Right. And again, I use this in quotes for those listening. Right. It is obviously a very pejorative term, but like the idea of saying like, oh, yeah, as a little boy, I could fly and I fought pirates. I'm Peter Pan.
Totally.
Is so grandiose and absurd that like that kid would be diagnosed probably with like some sort of delusional or psychotic disorder.
Yeah, you know, and that actually, I think it does lead well into the last thing you want to talk about, which is imagination, of just like what is just a function of losing childhood imagination and realizing how to like kind of conform to social norms, and what is like actually this person experienced trauma and has like no memory of childhood.
No memory of childhood. So I really love the scene in the movie where he like, you know, imagines the food and they start the thing, and he's really able to like click into it because, you know, imagination, I think we often think of as just a childhood kind of thing, right? Having an imaginary friend or like imaginary play, playing pretend, you know, all of those things we think of as something children do. And it is a very normative thing to do. Most children develop pretend play at around 15 months of age. So, you know, when they're doing that, they're playing out different scenarios, or they're extending themselves beyond their own experience to practice making their way in the world, finding their place within it. They can then experience all these different emotions based on imagination, right? Joy, excitement, awe. And so imagination is an incredibly important part of our development. But you know, one of the things that I really find interesting is like imagination also can play an incredibly important part in our adulthood. So I mean, imagination is the mother of invention, right? So the only way that we as humans can progress is through imagining what does not currently exist. And so like spending time in our minds in a space of imagination, in a space of the hypothetical, and allowing ourselves to go really fully into that. I mean, we've talked a little bit, but not enough. And in fact, we'll talk some more about this soon. But the idea of like mindfulness, meditation, even like psychedelic experiences, right? Which like I have had psychedelic experiences without a single chemical substance in me, right? In which I'm meditating and I am, you know, I've had this once was in like a sound bath. Another time was while like a Reiki healer was working on me, where I had full visions of things going on. And I was not detached from reality. I was able to like, if I had opened my eyes, I wouldn't have been like, where am I? You know what I mean? But these full, really complex, profound things can come to our mind when we allow ourselves into these spaces. And it can be such an incredibly important and like healing thing. This is why, I mean, so many of these, like I just named, right? A sound bath or even like using psychedelic medications, things like that, is thousands and thousands and thousands of years old, that it is so attached to like, how do we sort of unlock our unconscious? And in this case, like our unconscious being like non-judgmental space for open thought. Right?
Oh yeah, this is such a bigger conversation.
It's a huge conversation.
Yeah, because we also like glorify these kind of innovators, disruptors of industry, these people who have and maybe eccentric and not adhere to kind of social norms, but have
Yeah.
incredible capacity for creative thought and imagination that have
Yeah.
like changed the world fundamentally.
Yes.
And I just think that it's such an interesting like tension between like how do you function in society and also like allow yourself to be creative and imaginative and engage with that kind of it is like a higher level of
Yeah.
consciousness.
Einstein actually said, I'm enough of the artist to draw freely upon my imagination. Knowledge is limited, imagination encircles the world.
Mm,
And I really love, I love that this movie is so about that. It's so engaged in the concept of just free thinking and
mm-hmm.
realizing that like free thinking is especially with where we're at in politics in the world, like once we really like there's so many people debating all of these things, right? And like they're the sort of common thing is like if you go into a conversation with somebody with opposite opinions, the thing to say is like, what would you need to hear to change your mind? And if they say there's
Right.
nothing that can change their mind, right, then there's no point, right? Like there's
Mm-hmm.
no purpose. And so like just the realization that like one of the things that really clicked me, and this is when 2020 happened and all these things, and we really sort of entered this phase of like really understanding like an anti-capitalistic world, which like we're so in the zone of capitalism all the time that like
Totally.
I hadn't really extended myself, and just somebody like tweeted something stupid and funny, very not stupid at all, but quite funny because it really was a profound thing that made me think, that was like, how is it that we're born onto a planet covered in food and somehow I ended up with a credit score?
Yeah.
And like that really like kind of shook me because I was like, oh my gosh, right? The ways in which we are living our lives is not how things have to be. It's just how they
Right.
are. And
Yeah.
so like imagination, I think now, not more than ever, because, I can't speak to ever, but now as much as any time, like it's so important to be really spending time in the hypothetical,
Yeah.
spending time in the what ifs and in the possibilities.
Yeah.
And yeah, because it's so, one of the things, even like actually to go back to our last conversation about trauma, like one of the biggest things that we use in like trauma therapy is to reimagine a scenario. So like if someone's talking about a traumatic experience from their childhood, to bring someone in where they felt safe and be like, what do you think would have happened if they had been there? And we
Mm,
let them walk through it in their imagination of what might have happened. And they start to realize that like the only reason that this happened is because they were they were isolated, right? The only reason this
yeah.
happened is because the people that they can seek safety with weren't there, right? And so like
Yeah.
you can really use imagination to like heal so much of yourself and like
Yeah.
open your mind to so many more things other than just like I'm an idiot or I'm stupid or I'm whatever, and
Right.
just be like, maybe I'm fine, and
Right.
maybe there's some other things that aren't working.
Yeah.
So I love imagination.
Yeah. And it's cool. I mean, to your point, like that is an important part of treatment and therapy too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah. Ah, what a good movie.
This was a better pick than I thought it was originally, if I do say so myself. Like I picked it because I just really liked this movie, but there's like a lot of stuff to explore here. We didn't even
There's
talk about phobias.
Oh yeah. Oh
And
yeah, yeah, yeah.
there's like I mean we won't get into it, but there's
We
like
won't get into it today.
very obvious phobias with
Yeah.
like Peter's fear of flying, and with Hook's like fear of like clocks because of his
Yeah.
traumatic experience with
Yeah.
the alligator.
Yeah.
It's just really interesting.
It's it is very interesting.
There's
We're going to
lots of
talk about
trauma here.
phobias. There's lots of phobia stuff to be discussed.
Yeah.
Um I have a movie for us.
Yay.
And it's a bit of a departure
Okay.
from where we've been before. But I wanted to like spend some time in a world that I really love.
Okay.
And so I picked a movie from 2018,
Hmm.
and the tagline is "Long live the king, hero, legend. 2018.
King, hero, legend, departure. But it's a departure for us, but it's
For us.
in your
It's very much in my wheelhouse. Also very appropriate for next week.
Oh god. Oh, okay. Election. Something about elections.
No.
It's not political.
Nope.
Okay, then what
King.
is next week?
King. Long live the king.
Okay.
Hero.
King and next
Hero.
and next week?
One might even say he's such a good hero. He's a superhero.
Oh. Is it Marvel?
Yeah.
Okay, wait, no, now I'm excited.
What comes out next week?
Oh, Black Panther.
Yes.
Yes.
So we're gonna be the first Black Panther movie.
Yes. Okay, this is great.
We've not done a superhero movie. I
mean, I like them too. I've been to most of the Marvel movies I've seen in theaters have been with you.
I love a Marvel movie. I really do. I love a Marvel movie. And yeah, I'm really, really excited. This movie
that is
I
good.
think
That's timely stuff too.
It's timely stuff. I think there's so much to talk about. I really think this movie, and we'll go into it next week. I think this movie is really important. Like what?
Yeah.
Like how amazing and cool it is to have had this, and this film made like $1 billion or something crazy like that. It was like this hugely successful thing. So it was also just like successful as like the entire main cast of this film is Black, but also like Black people in science fiction is like a long and historical thing. I'll provide a little bit of context and background next week, but it's important that, you know, what this film does in terms of, you know, making the most advanced and brilliant nation in the world a Black tribal culture is like very, very cool. And it's really amazing. Also, Michael B. Jordan's in it, and he's so attractive. He's like really, I'm like blushing just thinking about how attractive Michael B. Jordan is.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah. Yes. He's going to be on the pod with us next week.
Oh just my kidding. God. I would
manifesting. Imagination.
Use your imagination.
All right. Well, I have been Dr. JD Barton.
And I have been Dr. Joanna Whitkin.
Please tell a friend about us. We're growing slowly but surely. Hit the subscribe button.
Like, rate. Check us out on YouTube.
Yes, check us out on YouTube. And we will see you next week. Until then, keep it real.
Psych. No, but do. But
no, keep it real.
Yeah.
Keep it real.
We love you.
We love you. Bye.
Bye.